In this video, we'll learn how to publish Quarto reveal.js slides using GitLab Pages. My name is Melissa Van Bussel, and I make videos about R. If this video is helpful for you, please be sure to subscribe to my channel, since this helps me make more videos. I wanted to create this video because there's a lot of documentation online about publishing Quarto projects using GitHub Pages as well as Quarto Pub, but there's definitely a lot fewer examples of using GitLab Pages. The process is a little less straightforward as well, and I know I definitely struggled a lot when initially figuring out how to do this. So in this video, we're going to walk through the steps, and we're going to start off really simple and then add complexity as we go. The first thing that I'm going to do is go over to the Terminal tab in RStudio, and then I'm going to switch into the directory where I want to create the project. And then once I'm in the right folder, I'm going to type Quarto create project and hit enter. And then I'll be asked which type of project I want to create. And we're going to create a website. So I'll toggle down to website and hit enter. And then I'm going to name this example slides. So that's going to create a new folder called example slides. And then here I'm asked whether I want to open it with VS Code or RStudio. So I'm going to open it with RStudio. So that part creates the R project file. And then I'm going to close RStudio and I'll double click on the R project. And then I'm going to create the file that's actually going to have our slides. So I'll go to File, New File, and then Quarto Presentation. And for the title, I'll put slide title, and we'll select reveal.js as the format. And let's just add in some slide content. And I'm going to save this as my slides.qmd. And then let's just really quickly render that to make sure that the slides look as expected. And there we have it. And then I'm going to go into the index.qmd, and I'm going to do something a little strange. I'm going to embed the my slides file as an iframe inside of the home page of this website. So I'm going to type iframe, and then the class is going to be slide deck, and the source is going to be the name of the file that contains the slides. Ours was called my slides.qmd, but instead of writing qmd, I'm going to write .html, since the slides will eventually be rendered to HTML. And then we'll just close the iframe and save that. Next, I'm going to create a blank project on GitLab, and I'm going to put it under my personal namespace, and I'll call this example slides. I'm going to set the visibility level to public, which I think is required for GitLab Pages to work correctly. And then I'm also going to uncheck the README and create the project. Under the push an existing folder section, I'm going to copy everything other than the first line here, which is just saying to make sure that you switch directory into the correct folder. So I'll copy this to my clipboard, and then I'm going to open Git Bash, and I'm going to navigate into the folder. And now that I'm in the right folder, I'm going to paste in the stuff that I copied from GitLab, and I'll hit enter, and then I'm going to hit refresh just to make sure that it all uploaded correctly. And then I'm going to go to deploy and then pages. And in order to get this to actually publish with GitLab Pages, we need to create a configuration file called gitlab-ci.yml. And you can create these manually, but they have a sort of walkthrough guide here that can help you generate that file really easily. So that's what I'm going to use. First, we need to select the image that we want to use, and I'm going to use Rocker Verse latest, and this has Quarto pre-installed and everything else that we'll need for this project. And then I'm also going to check off this little checkbox that says the application files are in the public folder. And there's a note here that says that GitLab Pages is only going to publish the files that are found in the public folder. I'll click next, and then in the build steps section, this is where I'm going to actually render the website and the slides. But as we just saw, we need to make sure that it gets outputted to a folder called public. Otherwise, GitLab Pages isn't going to be able to see that folder. So I'm writing Quarto render and then specifying that the output directory should be public. I'll click next, and then we can see on the right, this is the template that it automatically generated for us. And then we're just going to commit those changes, and this should take a minute or two to run. You can check the pipeline status. It's almost done running. And now that it's done running, I'm going to go back to deploy and then pages. And I'm going to unclick this use unique domain and click save changes. And what that checkbox is going to do is it's going to turn this pretty long and ugly URL into something that looks a lot nicer. So now this is the URL. And if I go here, I can see that I've got this website. And remember, we embedded the slides as an iframe on the home page of this website. So if we want to actually go to the slides themselves, all we need to do is add the name of the slides at the end. So this was my_slides.html, and now the slides are visible in full screen. So this was kind of the most basic example of how to upload your Quarto reveal.js slides to GitLab and then have them hosted using GitLab Pages. And this works well for most use cases, but things can also get a little bit more complicated depending on exactly what you're trying to do. So in this next part of the video, I'm going to show how you can set up custom CSS and have that CSS work properly on GitLab Pages, as well as when you render locally on your own computer. So I'm going to go back into the myslides.qmd, and I'm going to specify that we want to use a custom theme, and let's call this custom.scss. So I'm going to go ahead and create that custom.scss file, and let's say that I want to create a class inside of my custom CSS that has a background image anytime I use that class for a slide. So let's say I want to create a class that's called theme slide 1, and then over here I'm just going to paste in an example from the Quarto documentation that I modified a little bit. And then here I'm going to have this class be called theme-slide1. And as the background image, I want it to be a file called puppy.jpg, which is going to be inside of a subfolder called images. So in my project, let's create an images folder. And then inside of this images folder, I've got this picture here called puppy.jpg. And this is what it looks like. I just found this on Google. So we'll save that. And when I re-render, we can see that the image isn't actually visible. I'm going to open this in the browser for a second and kind of show why this is happening. So if I right click and then go to inspect and then go to console, and I'm going to do Control R to refresh the page. And here it's telling me that there's no puppy.jpg found. But if we look at where it's looking for this file, we can see that it thinks that the puppy.jpg file needs to be in this folder called site_libs/reveal.js/dist/theme/images/puppy.jpg. But if we go back to the folder, we can actually go to that location. So it's site-libs/reveal.js/dist/theme. And then it's expecting there to be this images/puppy.jpg. But as we can see, that's just not there. So what I can do to actually fix this is I can move this images folder inside of that weird subfolder that we just saw before. And if I paste this right here, and now if I refresh this page, all of a sudden the image works perfectly. Now that the file is in the right location, it knows exactly how to find it. So what this tells us is that we need a way to have our images get put into that weird subfolder all the way down here. Now, one way to do that is to just do what we did here and manually drag the files in as you need, but this isn't ideal for a couple of reasons. The first reason is because it's kind of tedious. We'd rather have it be automated. The second reason is because if we're trying to publish this to GitLab Pages, we can't drag and drop stuff around like that. So we need to find a way to automatically move the images into their correct location. And the third reason is because if we're trying to share these slides with anyone else, for example, if we're trying to create a theme or a template, it's going to be really confusing for that other person if they don't know about this weird subfolder that they have to put all of their images in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this images folder back to its original home, and I'm going to go into the gitlab-ci.yml file, and we're going to add a couple of extra steps in here. Now before we render, what we want to do is we're going to create a directory called public. Then we're going to render to the public folder. But after we do that, we're going to move the images folder into that weird subfolder that we saw before. So first we're going to make an images folder in the correct location. So that's under public/sitelibs/revealjs/dist/theme, and then a folder called images. And then we're going to copy our images folder that's currently in the home part of the directory. And we want to copy all files inside of that image folder. And we're going to put that copy in this subfolder here. I pushed those changes to GitLab. And now when I go here, I can see that the picture successfully worked. So that's awesome. Now we have it working on GitLab Pages, and there's just one step that's left. We need to make sure that when we render this locally, that the images go in the correct location as well. Now we already know that in order for this to render locally correctly, we need to move that images folder into that weird subfolder. So when we're running things locally, we can either copy and paste that images folder into the correct spot, or we can also do something very similar to what we did on GitLab Pages, and we can just write a script that'll automatically move those images to the correct location for us. To do that, I'm going to create a blank text file, and I'm pretty much going to take exactly what we did here in the script portion of the configuration for GitLab Pages, but we're just going to do this locally as well. So I'll copy and paste that into here, and we'll get rid of these dashes. And one other thing that would be really nice when we're trying to render locally is if we could make this file be something that we could double click and it would do all of these instructions and then launch the slides for us in a web browser. To do that, after moving things into the correct subfolder, I'm going to change directory into the folder that now has the slides, and then I'm going to open the slides up in a web browser by saying start, and then the name of the file that I want to launch in the browser. The word start here should work on Windows. There might be a different word that does an equivalent thing if you're using a different operating system. And then I'm going to save this file, and I'm going to call this renderslides.sh. When I double click on the renderslides.sh, it's going to run all of that for me in the terminal, and then it actually launched that for me in the web browser. And you can see here that this is actually locally on my computer right now. This is not on GitLab Pages like this one. And if I flip pages here, I can see that the image did work correctly. This setup is quite nice because it means that I can put images in this folder. I don't have to go into any weird subdirectory, and everything's just going to get automatically moved into the right place when it's time to actually render the slides. And that's going to be true whether I'm rendering the slides locally or on GitLab Pages. Quarto is awesome, and reveal.js presentations are really cool, but getting them to work properly on GitLab Pages is a little more challenging than with Quarto Pub or GitHub Pages, partially just because GitHub seems to just be so much more popular, so there's more documentation, more tutorials, and more examples to go off of. I know for me that made it really hard to figure out how to get this all set up properly for GitLab, so I really hope that you found this video helpful. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.